Page 6. There's a bit of a biography of this remarkable woman who has come to us from the United States of America. She's had a most interesting career, and she reminds me of my own flippant understanding of the happenings associated with the French Revolution, which have been trivialized and cartoonized, just to make up a word, quite recently and shown as a film made in Hollywood about the comings and goings. But I think for me, one of the most telling sections of the biographical notes are on page 6 with Mary-Eileen Russell's biog. One of the reasons I wrote Trianon is that I kept encountering educated people who really thought that Marie-Antionette said, "Let them eat cake." I kept running into Catholics, including priests and nuns, who thought that Louis XVI and Marie-Antionette were killed as a punishment for some egregious wickedness, etc., etc., etc. And she came to realize that the demonization of Louis XVI and Marie-Antionette in the popular mind is necessary in order to justify the excesses of the French Revolution and the destruction of the Christian society, specifically Catholic. That's what its purpose, that's what the function of the revolution was about, so far as my reading tells me. But a person who knows a great deal more than I know, or will ever know about this matter, is Mary-Eileen Russell, and it's a joy to introduce her.
Thank you very much. That was a magnificent introduction that I hope I can live up to. So we all know now that Marie-Antoinette never ever said, "Let them eat cake." If you come away with nothing else from this talk, please come away with that. She was a woman who devoted a great deal of her resources to feeding the poor and to housing the poor. And for that to be that "let them eat cake" myth to be one of the things associated with her is really obscene, because her charities were quite extensive. From the time she was a child, she was taught to give her own personal money to the poor. She provided her servants with pensions when in their old age. She taught her daughter to visit the sick and the poor in their homes. So that is one thing that we should all put out of our minds, that Marie-Antoinette would never have thought, "Let them eat cake," let alone have said, "Let them eat cake." The person who may have said something like that was actually the Queen of Louis XIV, Marie-Thérèse of Spain. At one point, there was a famine, and it is reported that Marie-Thérèse of Spain said, "Mon Dieu, why do they not eat pastry crust?" And that was what pastry crust was, what the beggars were often given at the back of the les pâtisseries, the pastry shops. So it was not a completely callous statement even for Queen Marie-Thérèse. This is one of the first times in history that I'm aware of that King Louis XVI and Queen Marie-Antoinette are receiving recognition for their Catholic faith at an official Catholic event. And I think it speaks very well and very highly for those who organized this event to have included this talk in this very magnificent and pious occasion. It is no small coincidence that Louis XVI and Marie-Antoinette should be a subject of this talk here, because they were fascinated with this part of the world. They had each read of the voyages of Captain Cook when they were in their teens and 20s. And when Captain Cook died and news of his death came to Versailles in 1779, Marie-Antoinette, although she had never met Captain Cook, she burst into tears because she had heard of his phenomenal travels throughout the world, Louis XVI wanted to follow up with Captain Cook's voyages by sending one of his own explorers. He sent the naval hero La Pérouse. La Pérouse explored all over the Pacific, and it was very interesting that the king did not wish La Pérouse to conquer land for France. Rather, he wanted it to be principally a scientific expedition. However, the king sent along some priests so that they could convert the pagans. The priests were also trained as scientists, so they could assist in collecting data about the various countries that were being discovered and the flora and fauna. When the King Louis XVI was, the day he was to be executed, there was still no word whether La Pérouse had returned or not. And the king, one of the last things he asked was, "Is there any word of Monsieur de La Pérouse?" Now, Marie-Antionette, most of her books were taken away from her, her breviary, which was taken away from her when she was awaiting death in the Conciergerie. However, she was allowed to have a copy of the Voyages of Captain Cook, which she was reading in a way to distract her mind from the terrible experiences which she had had, and it was said to be one of her favorite books. Now, at the center of the French Revolution was an attack on the Holy Catholic Church, but most especially an attack on the Holy Eucharist and on the nature of the sacred priesthood. This is the theme which I wish to be the sort of the undercurrent of my first novel, Trianon, which is dedicated to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. As we know, the Sacred Heart of Jesus, a devotion to the Sacred Heart and devotion to the Blessed Sacrament are so entwined as to be almost one and the same. The swirling at the center of the story is the mystery of sacrifice, which is part of the mystery of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. I started writing the novel Trianon while I was in graduate school, studying the politics of the revolution. And I set it aside for many, many years. However, while I was on a trip to Vienna in 1995, I found myself in the Capuchin crypt where the Habsburgs are buried, including Marie-Antoinette's mother, Empress Maria Theresa. And I said some prayers by the tomb of the Empress. And it was right after that I was looking in my father's basement for something else, and as usual, when you're looking for one thing, you find something else that you weren't looking for. And I found all my notes for the novel Trianon. And I decided to take it up again and to finish it, which I did. And so I really felt that I was being called to especially show to young people, because that's really who the book is. Well, the book is for all ages, but I wanted it so that young people could read it, because it doesn't have too many explicit things in it. I wanted young people to see the truth about Louis XVI and Marie-Antoinette and what was really happening during the French Revolution. I currently have a weblog called Tea at Trianon, which I share a lot of my research with my readers. And I talk about other things too. I talk about a lot of Catholic doctrinal matters. And I have over 10,000 readers a month. It's doing very well. However, around the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, I did an article on the Immaculate Conception. And a young lady who actually, I think, was from New Zealand, wrote to me, and she was a Protestant young lady, and she said, "I come to your blog because I want to learn about Marie-Antoinette, and here you have all of this Catholic stuff. And so I said to her, I said, well, you know, the Catholic faith was the faith embraced by Marie-Antoinette. If you want to understand her, it would be good to understand a little of her faith, and especially the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception, because long before it was defined as a dogma, Marie-Antoinette's family had a special devotion to the Immaculate Conception of Our Lady. And Marie-Antoinette was told by her mother that she must always try to receive Holy Communion on feast days of Our Lady and display a special devotion to the Holy Mother of God, which Marie-Antoinette did. There is also an interesting connection of the family of Louis XVI, the Bourbon family, the royal family of France, with the Carmelite order. Now, many people don't realize that one of the daughters of the very profligate King Louis XV, his youngest daughter, well, all of his daughters were very, very religious, very pious, just like his wife, Queen Marie Lesinska. The youngest daughter of King Louis XV, who is also the aunt of King Louis XVI, Madame Louise of France, became a Carmelite nun. She deliberately chose the strictest Carmelite monastery in France that she could find, the poorest one, where she would really have to experience holy poverty and where she would be able to do penance for France. And she also wanted to make atonement for some of the excesses of the court, especially some of her father's behaviors. Now, Madame Louise died a couple years before the revolution started, but she has been beatified as a blessed of the Church under the name of Blessed Teresa of St. Augustine. Now, Blessed Teresa of St. Augustine, when she received the holy habit of Carmel, Marie-Antoinette, who had just come to France to be married, came to the Carmelite monastery, and she gave the veil to her husband's aunt. Also, Madame Louise, Blessed Teresa, would write Marie-Antoinette when she heard of financial needs of poor people, especially poor girls who had no dowry and wanted to become nuns. As you know, in those days, you could not enter religious life unless you had a dowry. That is, a woman could not enter religious life unless she had a dowry. So one young lady named Mademoiselle Lidouin was very poor. She appealed to the king's aunt, who was a Carmelite nun. The Carmelite nun, Madame Louise, Blessed Teresa, wrote to Marie-Antoinette for a dowry for the young lady. Marie-Antoinette gave the dowry. That young lady later became a nun herself and was the prioress of the Carmelite monastery at Compiègne, and she took the name Teresa of St. Augustine. And that Teresa of St. Augustine is also a blessed of the Church because she led her sisters to the guillotine when they were being executed on July 17th, 1794, offering their lives for France. 10 days later, the terror ended. So there are many, many connections between Marie-Antoinette, Louis XVI, and the Carmelite order. Now, most people that think or are made to believe that King Louis XVI was not a very intelligent person, that he was a do-nothing king. Louis XVI was an intrepid reformer. His reforms began from the moment of his reign. He immediately, in 1774, when he became King of France, he started a reform of the finances. He wanted to cut back expenses. He wanted to cut back the expenses of the court. He also, at the same time, wanted to assist the needs of the people, who he knew were crushed by the burden of taxation. He started the School of Medicine in Paris. He abolished the corvée. The corvée was a practice by which the peasants had to repair the roads. Now, King Louis XVI abolished that and made it so that the soldiers would have to repair the roads instead of the peasants. He also abolished all forms of involuntary servitude, so that when Thomas Jefferson was in France with his slaves were free in France. They were slaves in Virginia, but in France they had full civil rights and protection of the law, which they did not have in their own country. King Louis XVI reformed hospitals. He gave civil rights to Jews who had not had that before. He reformed prisons. He abolished all forms of torture. And he also made steps toward the abolition of the lettres de cachet. The lettres de cachet were little writs by which a person could be arrested and imprisoned without benefit of a trial. And so the king was trying to bring justice and freedom to his country. However, the French Revolution was not just about reform. It was really about subverting Christian society, creating a completely secular society. Now, the way for this was paved by the fact that many people in France in the years before the Revolution had bought into the doctrines of the Enlightenment. They downplayed the devotional life. They downplayed the belief in the miracles of Christ and in the miracles wrought by the saints of the church. There was a great deal of corruption and immorality at the French court, as everyone knows. And the kings, unfortunately, King Louis XIV and King Louis XV, gave a very bad example. This sowed a great deal of cynicism toward religion, and this was later used as fodder to attack the monarchy and to attack the church. Now, Louis XVI and Marie-Antionette, they tried to reform the morals of the court. However, Marie-Antionette was a very beautiful woman. She was, especially between the ages of 18 and 21, was a little frivolous. She spent probably more money than she should have on clothes and jewelry. She loved to dance, she loved parties, and while there's absolutely no proof at all, not a scrap of evidence that Marie-Antoinette ever violated her marriage vows at all, it is still, people used that time in her youth when she was a little indiscreet. People used that time, her enemies used that as fodder against her and to caricature her as an immoral woman. But that was done to bring down the monarchy, because in order to destroy a family, if you can destroy the mother, then you have the children. The queen was like the mother of the country, and if she could be destroyed, then they could destroy the nation. So that was part of the attack on Marie-Antoinette. It was very premeditated. The pornographic pamphlets against her are still, there are some that are in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, which you can only see with very special permission because they are so terrible. This was done very deliberately to destroy the people's respect for the Queen and to make everyone think that she was actually, if not doing such egregious things, perhaps she was doing something. They figured she had to be doing something terrible. I want to emphasize here that for Marie-Antoinette herself, the most important role in her life, other than being her husband's wife and his queen, was being the mother of her children. And while Marie-Antoinette is often portrayed as the queen who danced while the people starved, and as I said, that is a false view, since while she did like to dance when she was young, she also had extensive charities. Marie-Antoinette was a very devoted mother. She insisted on taking care of her children herself, rather than handing them over to servants. She planned their education very carefully. Her daughter was always with her. She wanted her daughter to learn how to have compassion for the needy. So she would take her daughter with her daughter Madame Royale. She took her with her when she would visit the sick and the poor. the revolutionaries, while Marie-Antoinette was imprisoned, and after her husband, the king, had been killed, they knew they had to destroy her, and the way they had to destroy her was through her motherhood. So that she was put on trial in October of 1793. A few months before that summer, they had taken away her little 8-year-old boy, who was at that point the King of France, Louis XVII. He was forcibly taken from her. He was subjected to extremely abusive treatment. He was given alcohol, he was shown pornography, he was molested, he was beaten, he was starved. He would wake him up every few hours. They wouldn't let him have a decent night's sleep. And when they forced him to sign a paper against his mother claiming that his own mother had abused him. Marie-Antoinette knew they were mistreating her son because she could hear. She was in the upstairs and he was downstairs. She could hear him crying. She didn't know exactly what they were doing to him until she was on trial herself. And she was accused of this by one of the revolutionaries, accused her. She, of course, was stunned. She couldn't believe that anyone could say anything so horrible. She couldn't respond. She was struck dumb. She couldn't speak. Then they repeated the accusation. The queen rose to her feet, and I will read to you exactly what she said in French. She said, Si je n'ai répondu, c'est que la nature se refuse à répondre à une pareille inculpation faite à une mère. J'en appelle à toutes celles qui peuvent se trouver ici. Which means, if I do not respond, it is because nature refuses to answer such a charge made to a mother. I appeal to all the mothers who are here. And all the mothers in the room stood up and cheered for the queen. And they were all disgusted. Even the hardened revolutionaries were quite disgusted that one of their comrades would try to destroy her in such an outrageous manner. Now, this was particularly disgusting because, as I said, Marie-Antoinette was a devoted mother. There is not a single one of her letters to her family which does not include all the details of her children's upbringing and all their little cute things that they did and just all her care of them. So for her to be demonized in that way was completely outrageous, but that is evidence of the extremes to which the revolution was willing to go in order to destroy the queen. Now, one of her last things, her very last letter she wrote to her sister-in-law, Madame Elizabeth, was about her children. She said, I feel profound sorrow in leaving my poor children. You know that I lived only for them and for you, my good and tender sister. My God, how heartrending it is to leave them forever. Farewell, farewell. And that was one of the last things she wrote hours before her execution. One of the central themes of the novel Trianon is the consecration to the Sacred Heart of Jesus made by King Louis XVI while he was under house arrest in 1791. Now, most of you may know the story of St. Margaret Mary Alacoque and how our Lord appeared to her and told her to go to the King of France, who at the time was Louis XIV, and ask that France be consecrated to the Sacred Heart of Jesus by the king. She sent word to the king, but he did not. His confessor told him it was not necessary to make such a consecration. The king listened to his confessor, which, I mean, he should have listened to his confessor. So for whatever reason, the consecration was not made at that time. It was not made by Louis XV either. So Louis XVI, while he was ill and in prison, after he was under house arrest, he wasn't in a prison, but he was a prisoner. He had signed the civil constitution of the clergy in the spring of 1791. Now, the civil constitution of the clergy really broke the ties of the French church with the Pope in Rome, and it denied the papal supremacy. And every priest had to swear to that, or else they could not offer Mass or distribute the sacraments under French law. The king went along with it at first. Then he became very sick, his conscience troubled him. He heard word from the Holy Father in Rome that this was not, he had to resist this. So the king renounced it, and he would not receive Holy Communion from any priest who had made the oath to the government against the Holy Father. And Marie-Antionette absolutely would not go along with it at all. And she thought Louis was wrong to go along with it a little bit in the beginning. Marie-Antoinette, as soon as it was passed, she sent her confessor away because he had made the oath to the government, and she immediately got a new confessor who would come secretly and offer Mass at the Tuileries at night so she could receive Holy Communion, confess and receive Holy Communion from a priest faithful to the Holy See. So King Louis XVI, he made the vow that if he were ever given his freedom, he would consecrate France to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And his words were very beautiful. He says, "O Jesus Christ, divine Redeemer of all our iniquities, it is your adorable heart that I want to deposit the overflowing of my afflicted heart. I call upon the help of the tender heart of Mary, my majestic protector and my mother, the assistance of St. Louis, my most famous patron and my ancestor. O adorable heart, by the so pure hands of my powerful intercessors, receive with kindness the wishes that confidence inspires in me, and that I offer to you as a humble expression of my feelings. If, by an effect of the infinite kindness of God, I recover my freedom, my crown, and my royal power, I promise solemnly to revoke as soon as possible all the laws which will be indicated to me either by the Pope or by a council that have been against the purity and integrity of the faith." And so there were several things which the king promised to our Lord. Now, as we know, he was never able to fulfill his promise because he was put to death. Now, as of June 1792, all the priests who had refused the oath to the government were to be sent on prison ships to prison camps in the New World. Now, Louis XVI, who still had the power of veto, he vetoed the law in order to protect the priests. And so the mob attacked the royal family in June 1792 at the Tuileries Palace. The royal family was almost killed. Louis XVI, he met the crowd himself and very bravely held them off and calmed them down. So he ended up giving them a tour of the state apartments, and then they went their way. So, King Louis XVI was a very brave man, and he was very firm in his faith. And this affected people. This affected people who came in contact with him. Now, on the day of his death, a non-juring priest was able to celebrate Mass in King Louis' cell, and so he was able to receive Holy Communion. The Queen also secretly received Holy Communion in her cell right before her trial. A priest risked his life to bring her the Holy Eucharist and to hear her confession. So while there were the attacks on the priesthood and attacks on the Eucharist, there were also just glorious ways in which priests risked their lives to bring the sacraments to the faithful. I want to talk about forgiveness, the forgiveness of Louis XVI and Marie-Antoinette, because I believe that is a fruit of love of the Eucharist, and it is also a fruit of devotion to the Sacred Heart. The hallmark of Christian charity is the ability to forgive. Whatever faults and flaws Louis XVI and Marie-Antoinette may have had, there can be no doubt that they bore their wrongs patiently, bore wrongs done to them patiently, and they forgave their enemies in a Christ-like manner. Louis XVI, in his last will and testament, which he wrote on Christmas Day, 1792, less than a month before he died, wrote, "I pardon with all my heart those who made themselves my enemies, without my having given them any cause, and I prayed God to pardon them, as well as those who, through false or misunderstood zeal, did me much harm. The king made it very clear he did not want anyone to avenge his death. He wrote, "I exhort my son, should he have the misfortune of becoming king, to remember he owes himself wholly to what he owes wholly to the happiness of his fellow citizens, that he should forget all hates and all grudges, particularly those connected with the misfortunes and sorrows which I am experiencing." Marie-Antoinette's forgiveness has an especially supernatural aura. When the Queen wrote her last letter to her sister-in-law, Madame Elizabeth, her son had been taken away from her and brutalized. She knew that he had been forced to testify against her. She had been through the ordeal of a humiliating trial, which had been designed to break her will. But Marie-Antoinette was able to forgive those who had tried to destroy her by corrupting her little boy. And to forgive, for a mother to be able to forgive that, I think, requires a special grace from Almighty God. She wrote in her last letter, hours before her death, "I beg pardon of all whom I know, especially of you, my sister, for all the vexations which, without intending it, I may have caused you. I pardon all my enemies the evil they have done me." Not only does the Queen forgive, but she asks forgiveness. Humility and compunction drown any bitterness or recriminations. Although certainly in her agony, she experienced the full range of emotions. Christian love overcomes hatred. Only someone who sincerely believed in and loved Jesus Christ could make that leap from hellish circumstances to the heights of courage, love, and martyrdom. Now, Marie-Antoinette, her last communion, I want to discuss that a little. In Le Nôtres, The Last Days of Marie-Antoinette, published in 1907, he includes some revealing first-hand accounts, including the testimony of the priest who, in spite of great risks, was able to say Mass for the Queen before her death. Abbé Magnan, who was the priest, stated the following: "I celebrated Holy Mass and gave communion to the Queen, who, as she fortified herself with Eucharistic bread, received from God the courage to bear uncomplainingly all the torture that awaited her." Now, before Marie-Antoinette died, she wrote in her last letter, an act of faith, "I die in the Catholic, Apostolic, and Roman religion, that of my fathers, that in which I was brought up, and which I have always professed. Farewell, farewell, I must now occupy myself with my spiritual duties." On page 10 of this wonderful brochure, there are some quotes from spiritual writings of King Louis XVI and Queen Marie-Antoinette, including the Queen's act of faith in her last letter, and the King's act of faith in his last will and testament. And I think if you want to read these and meditate on them, they're really worthy of meditation, very inspiring. On page 6 of the brochure is the URL of my weblog. If anyone would like to visit it, I have many articles published there. The links are on the sidebar to the articles about Louis XVI and Marie-Antoinette and their family. And so if you want to know where I'm getting this, I include my sources. And it's the first-hand sources and the second-hand sources from which I took my research. Please feel free, if you're on my blog, feel free to comment. My email address is there if you'd like to write to me and have any comments or questions. Please feel free. I always answer my mail, and I try to answer the questions as best as I can. Also, if anyone has purchased any of my books, I'd be happy to sign them and answer any questions here. So just, if you can find me, just come ask me and I will sign, autograph your books. Be happy to do that. Now, are there any questions now that you would like to ask about the life of the king or the queen or about the French Revolution? If anyone has any questions at all, I'd be happy to try to answer. It's kind of a glare, I can't see. Well, I know the movie Marie-Antionette was shown here a few weeks ago. And it's a very interesting movie. I didn't like it myself, but a lot of people did, and it really inspired interest in Marie-Antoinette. And so I've gotten a lot of people reading my books because they saw the film and they want to know what really happened. I think the film was good in that it made people a little more sympathetic toward Marie-Antoinette and Louis XVI. However, the movie showed Marie-Antoinette having an extramarital affair. Now, as I said before, there is absolutely no evidence that anything like that ever happened. All the evidence shows that Marie-Antoinette lost her life by being faithful to her husband, by remaining at his side. She had many opportunities where she could have escaped to Austria and taken the children and left, but she would not leave her husband. She felt she needed to be at his side through his agonies, and so she shared his agonies and ultimately came to the same death. So I think that because when you have a person like Marie-Antoinette, who was beautiful and charismatic and very, famous and infamous, then people tend to take little bits of legend and embellish them. And there have been so many novels written about Marie-Antoinette. So the whole legend of the affair with Count Fersen is really that. It's a legend, but it's something very romantic that people like. People like love stories. And to me, the real love story was how Marie-Antoinette stayed with her husband. And her relationship with Louis was much more interesting to me than any mythical love affair. So if there are no questions, that wraps it up for today. Tomorrow I will be talking about the daughter of Louis XVI and Marie-Antoinette, who was the heroine of my second novel, Marie-Thérèse Charlotte. She was the only member of her family to survive, of her immediate family, to survive the revolution, and she returned to France many years later and helped rebuild the church and rebuild Christian devotion after years of revolution and the Napoleonic age and all that. So we'll be talking about her tomorrow, but if there are no questions, then I'll just say goodbye for now, and thank you very much for your attention.